Hello again. Thanks for coming on. And I didn't want to start getting too deep into everything, but a little bit of an idea of what I'm doing so that you kind of have an idea of the framework. There's going to be a couple of different formats for what I'm doing. Some of it is talking to people like you about your experiences and what you learned from it. Some of it is talking about my experiences and what I've learned along the way. And I'm also still learning, still trying to fill my head with all kinds of hopefully good knowledge. So I'm doing a lot of books,
Totally.
reading a lot of things, watching a lot of thought leaders and stuff. And so trying to share my experience through all of that. So the podcast is called Doubting Thomas, and that has a little bit of a special significance for me with my understanding of the Bible and, being raised in Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And what I am hoping to start with is kind of like a framework for you, and something I actually don't really know anything about is, what was your life like before YWAM, particularly with your faith and just your upbringing?
Yeah, totally. Thanks for having me on, by the way, again.
Yeah.
Super nice of you to ask. Yeah, so I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, Bible Belt, a huge hub for a charismatic evangelical Christianity, I would say. It definitely started kind of booming when my parents were young and got together. And they went to, it's called Vineyard Church. It turned into Metro Christian Fellowship, and then or Kansas City Fellowship, and then turned into, eventually the pastor started IHOP.
Okay.
Kansas
So
City.
you were pre-IHOP?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was a part of Mike Bickle's church, I guess. He married my parents. He was their pastor before he started IHOP.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up in a very big church where there was big worship teams, dancing, singing, very charismatic. And I had a pretty decent childhood when it came to church because I just thought it was fun. And I had friends there, and there's big children's church and games and prizes and stuff. But my parents definitely bought into the idea of kind of like James Dobson and these different preachers that were like, okay, this is a very specific way you're meant to raise your kids. You have a ton of kids, you raise them to be Christian, and you make, you take over the world with your Christian family. And not, my parents are such sweet, good people and amazing people. And so it's like there's this insidious side to the beliefs that they kind of jumped into and went with, even though they aren't really like that ill-intended, or, however you say it. And so they decided to have as many kids as they possibly could. And so I am in the middle of 13 kids. I have 7 younger, 5 older. Yeah, it's really crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And my entire, I guess, growing up was focused on praying, reading the Bible, and being a good Christian. And some of that was really good, and I liked some of it. We did family devotions together. My parents homeschooled all of us because they were wanting to shelter us from the world, basically. And so my life leading up to going to YWAM was basically, I kind of was just a Christian by default, even though there was times when I, gave my life to Jesus, became baptized, everything like that. But it was kind of a default in the family because this is just how you are.
Yeah.
And thankfully in my preteen, teen years, we went to a pretty decent church. It became significantly smaller because Mike Bickle left and started IHOP, and some people went and some people stayed. And so we kind of stayed in this smaller church, and I had a pretty good experience with just youth group and being able to sing on the worship team. And I just had a super genuine faith in God and I loved to read the Bible and lead worship and sing and all this stuff. I think because of different mental health struggles I've had. I have OCD, which I didn't find out until late 20s. And so that made being a part of a pretty intense religion or religious, life pretty intense for me because it all kind of got misconstrued through that. And while I was super genuine in my faith, there was an aspect that was obsessive compulsive, basically stuff going on within that. And it's taken me a long time to kind of sort that out and figure out what was what. But I grew up, my parents had us read a ton of those missionary books that are YWAM publishing kind of books, and Jesus Freaks, which was like all these people getting martyred for Jesus. And I grew up with this really positive outlook on missions and missionaries and being a martyr. And so I decided to join YWAM because I was going through it as a teenager. I was struggling so much and I needed to just get away from Kansas City. And I had heard good things about YWAM from different people at church. And so I was like, well, that could be really cool to go focus, 6 months of my life on God and just growing my relationship with God and doing something for God. And yeah, I don't know if you have any questions, but that's kind of like the before.
Yeah, I was a little bit curious, just don't have to go into like heavy detail about any specific thing, but would you say that there was some kind of like a doubting aspect before you went into YWAM that you were trying to seek answers to, or was it just because you needed to get away?
I definitely had some doubting, but mainly when it came to, so to me, the Bible, even though I still like it and there's some stuff that I love about it, there's so much stuff that doesn't make sense. And the way that I grew up, it's kind of like, that's not a good thing to say, or that's not like acceptable to be like, well, it doesn't make any sense. Because if you say
Mm-hmm.
that to an adult or a pastor or whatever, they're going to say,
Yeah.
it's faith, it's mystery, it's God, it's not supposed to make sense, that kind of thing. And so I really struggled with, all the healing aspects, the speaking in tongues, all these different things that are like, you can't really measure or prove, or, if an actual healing or a raising from the dead happened, you should be able to
Mm-hmm.
prove it in this day and age. But
Yeah.
especially back then, it's like, okay, are healings actually happening? Is
Mm.
everyone just faking speaking in tongues?
Mm-hmm.
And just really struggling with just making sense of the Bible, but being taught that it's super simple, which even YWAM kind of did that too, where it's like, no, it's super simple. It's like the simple gospel and it's simple like creation to through all those aspects. Even growing up, I learned the books of the Bible we went through the stages of creation, the fall, Cain and Abel, and each section has its little name and it's taught to be super clear and a story from start to finish that you can just follow and be like, this makes sense. So I'm going to, give my life to Jesus. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, even till today, since I was a kid, I was like, a lot of this doesn't make sense, but my heart is in it and I have faith to just, kind of go with what my parents are saying. So I definitely was wrestling with, I guess, God's power, God's goodness, like all sorts of things that especially as a teenager, I was going through a lot and I didn't understand at all what was going on mentally and emotionally and everything. And it just seemed like God wasn't engaging or doing anything in regards to that, if that makes sense. And so I think me going away to YWAM was kind of this, I'm going to give my time to this and I'm going to give it my all and put my heart into this. And as my kind of move on the chessboard, let's say, and say, okay, that's my move. And I'm going to see what God does and what actually happens, with
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, just for anybody who doesn't know, the next phase of that is you show up, you pick a base, which would be like Colorado Springs, and you did your
Mm-hmm.
DTS there, right? Your discipleship
Mm-hmm.
training school. So, what
Yes.
was that time like for you, and what kind of stuff did you learn while you were in it?
Yeah. So discipleship training school, basically, it's 3 months of classroom setting you're learning and then 3 months on outreach. I think it was a really cool experience for me to just meet new people and hear from new, I guess, teachers and people who were wanting to share their story and teach what they knew about the Bible and God and stuff like that. I think I struggled it's like there's so many different teachers in YWAM and they all have different beliefs in some ways, and seeing so many people from different backgrounds and then just trying to basically sort out what I actually believe based on what they're teaching. And it's so difficult to do in such a small amount of time, I feel like. And my DTS was pretty intense. I don't know if I'm trying to decide if I want to get into that aspect of it, but I feel like being in YWAM DTS, I definitely learned stuff from teachers, but it's almost like there was way too much information for me to be able to sort through. And I think with places like that, it's not like it's super sinister, but I feel like that is almost one of the aspects of a place like that. There's
It's
like
almost
so much
intentional.
going on and so much information and so much new information, let's say, or just added information or whatever it is. And then as a student, you have almost no time to be by yourself and figure out what is actually going on and what you believe and that kind of stuff. And so that might be an intentional factor, but it definitely was an overwhelming time for me.
Yeah. Did you have anything that really stood out to you from your classes during that time? Because they have a different theme every week, right?
Yeah,
Any kind
it
of
was
breakthrough
interesting
moments
to
or?
me. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I did have some breakthrough moments. Like, that's the thing. Even though I don't really have a ton of the same, I guess, beliefs right now, I am a very spiritual person, and I have had some amazing spiritual experiences, I guess. I think it was really awesome for me to be able to be away from my family and kind of individualize, if you will, a little bit, even though it wasn't that extreme because I'm still in the same belief system and everything. But just be able to focus on, okay, who am I on my own away from my family, and what do I think about God, and what do I actually want in that relationship, and what do I need? And I was in a very broken place, and I definitely had breakthrough moments. I'm not sure about in class, to be honest,
Okay.
but more like I was given that somewhat of the time to just be by myself and think about these different teachings were affecting me and not necessarily pulling from just my family's beliefs. And also, almost, which we can talk about the pros and cons of this too, but being in a vulnerable position to be able to maybe look at some things that I hadn't been willing to look at or wasn't able to look at and go to a deeper level and go to a vulnerable place. The unfortunate thing is I ended up with a leader who was untrustworthy, and there's pros and cons of that vulnerability, if that makes sense. And I definitely had a leader who took advantage of that and was not a trustworthy person. And I came in very trusting, but man, it's been so long now. It's 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm like,
It's hazy.
and so much happened at YWAM. So it's like,
Mm,
I'm trying to think of a specific time of a moment in those classes, but it's also hazy. And I ended up staffing so many schools and DTSs that I
yeah.
almost did that so many times.
Okay. I'd be interested in
I
hearing
think
more
it,
about that when we get to it too.
yeah, I think it was cool to experience these focused weeks of identity and calling and father heart and that kind of thing, and really getting to a specific focus on an aspect of God, or, a specific thing in the Bible that you maybe breezed over, where it's talking
Hmm.
about how God sees you, and, how you do have a individual identity that is important, and all of that stuff. And again, it was really cool in a lot of ways. And then mixed in with, it's also mixed in with the kind of YWAM DNA or whatever of, yeah, this is your identity and God loves you and all that stuff. And of course, you're called to be here and be a missionary. And that is your calling, kind of thing, almost pushed on you. And so it was kind of a struggle for me to get the good parts, basically. And
Yeah.
obviously, because I stayed, it took me a while to sort out the bad stuff. And
Yeah. So did you start having additional doubts during that period, or did that come much later? Because I know a little bit about your history, but I don't really know the steps.
yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, before I keep going, I would love to hear from you why you named this Doubting Thomas, and what, not that I need to know, but I am curious what
Hmm.
your relationship with that doubting is, and, what you mean by even doubting Thomas, because that could
Yeah,
be,
I did.
is a
Yeah,
lot.
I did a brief introduction, but I don't think you've probably listened to what I've put out yet, and it's also not great material yet. I'm learning as I go. But
Yeah, I'll have to
the
go
initial
listen for
idea
sure.
came from it. First off, my middle name is Thomas, and so I've always put a little bit of an emphasis, kind of, in what our names mean, where they came from, and why we were given them. And it might sound a little bit strange, but I have a completely biblical name. Benjamin is son of my right hand, and then Thomas is not entirely related, but it's often associated just with the Apostle Thomas and the fact that he was the one who doubted the resurrection of Jesus. So the framing of this project is kind of coming from sort of a deconstruction viewpoint, in that I had some things happen in my life where I've never really been 100% confident in what I believe. I've always had questions, and I've never been able to find very satisfactory answers to them. And so that Thomas side of me seems to have just always been there. I've always been the kind of person who just never accepted anything that people told me just as pure fact. I've never been a person who was really capable of leaning into faith. And sometimes I really wanted to. I really want to believe. I really want to have that sense of comfort and belonging. And just it
Totally.
always seemed like there was a barrier. And when you start getting into trying to understand who God is and how he works, you start asking questions like, well, did God make Thomas that way, or did Thomas choose to be that way? Did God make me this way? Is there something that I'm supposed to be learning from these experiences? It seems like this is coming easier to other people, and I don't seem to be able to grasp it. So I don't know how well that answers your question, but
Yeah.
I'm in a season of life where I'm comfortable with starting to ask these things again. For a while, it was a little bit too raw, I guess you could
Yeah,
say, a little bit
absolutely.
too stressful. And I tried doing something kind of like this once before, and it was in a phase when my wife and I were both kind of starting to ask a lot of questions, starting to develop some different opinions, and then she ended up kind of coming back into like the more traditional way of thinking, I guess you could say, and I was still over here like, what do I do now? And so
Yeah.
now
Like,
I'm
what about
trying
me?
to figure it out for myself. Like, okay, I still don't have that. I still don't hear God, and I'm just not sure, like, as far as me and my faith and stuff, where do I go from here? What is really true? What is moral? What's real?
Yeah. Yeah. For real. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I definitely relate on some levels. I don't think we're the exact same or anything. Of course, we're two very different people. But I can totally relate to that doubting and just being like, okay, am I missing something here? And looking at, let's say, a group of people in worship or a sermon or whatever it is, and being like, these people are interacting in this way or getting this experience, and I'm on the outside watching, being like, is something supposed to be happening? Or, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I feel like way more people probably relate to that than we would think.
I haven't
People
thought of
just
that
aren't
actually.
going around saying that. You know what I'm
I always
saying?
just thought it was
Because,
me.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I'm realizing that that's super true for so many things. Like, people in these groups, let's say just a big church or YWAM or whatever, you want to fit in, you want to belong, you want to be just the same as other people. And I think everyone as every human, I think, has a massive part of them that is just seeking the group and wanting to fit in and wanting to belong and wanting to be the same as another person so that they can find, common ground and everything like that. It's just like in who we are as humans. And so when we come to a church or YWAM or, any of these places, it's like there's a majority of people feeling the way that you feel or that I felt at times, where it's like I'm on the outside looking in and it feels like I'm
Hmm.
missing a piece or there's a disconnect. And the problem is people perform and fake stuff and are okay with living in not necessarily double life in a super sinister way, which some people do have very sinister double lives, but some people have a double life in the way of just they want their faith or their whatever the thing is, they want that to be genuine. Maybe it's not quite there. So they're just faking it till they make it. And they're just performing and they're just doing what they think everyone wants them to do. And it took me leaving YWAM and hearing other people's experiences to realize that other people weren't, I guess, operating as authentically as me. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way or anything like that. I just mean there's so many more people than you think that are just going with the flow and faking it till they make it. And
Yeah.
aren't willing to have questions, aren't willing to stand up and say, well, what about this? This is what I think. Like, they're just not willing to. They will not give up the feeling of the belonging and being a part of the group. And I noticed that at YWAM, that there were kind of multiple groups of people, or people on this side and people on this side, and everyone was in this group. I made a TikTok about this, but this group is treated a certain way and this group is treated a certain way. And the only difference is one group is not being fully honest and authentic and open about what is going on with them. They're just faking it and performing, and then maybe keeping secrets, or even if the secret is just like, I don't know, I'm not fully bought into this, but I'm just doing it, which again isn't
Yeah.
evil or wrong. You're just kind of going with it. All that to say, I feel like there's way more people than you think that feel maybe not exactly like you have felt or feel now, but It's more than you think, because I consider myself more of a woo-woo spiritual faith aspect type person, but I also can totally relate in a lot of ways to what you're saying about well, this doesn't really make sense, and it's not just clicking in the same way that it seems to be clicking for other people. And there could be other underlying things, of course, tied to that. Just people's personality, personal experiences you've had, or as you said, were we created just the way that we are, or are we moving with more freedom and choice than, who knows, like
Yeah.
Thomas?
So as far as your story goes, would you prefer to kind of just say that YWAM wasn't really great for me and that didn't work out, and then focus on like what you did after YWAM? Or were you okay with talking about it a little bit more?
I'm totally okay with talking about it more.
So for me, I did my discipleship training school, and then I went and I did a secondary school. Those were both the business as mission lane of things, which probably doesn't mean anything to most people, but kind of an experimental thing. I don't even know if it's still going or not, but that was as far as I ever went. When I got into my secondary school, it kind of felt like the mentorship really just dropped off, which some people might find a little bit more freeing, having the more spare time. But because of the stuff that was going on in my life, I could have really used more of that focused DTSO leadership at that time, and didn't
Yeah.
get it. And that was kind of the pebble getting knocked over the edge of the cliff for me. And I do intend to share my whole story at some point, but that wasn't what the focus of this was supposed to be. So I've always been a little bit curious. What was the thing that drew you into wanting to go on staff and then eventually decide not to continue doing that?
Yeah. The thing that drew me to being on staff is I would say, pouring into other people and helping and loving and teaching, guiding, all these things that are just in me as a person. And when you grow up as a Christian and you are doing missions work or that kind of stuff, it almost feels, and YWAM can make it feel like that is the best, most highest calling that you can do and the most important thing that you can do. And the reason I decided to join staff was because I was like, okay, I can use my day-to-day life and my life as basically for God and to impact people in a positive way. And I never really was that interested in the missions aspect, which is weird because it's youth with a mission, but the missions aspect when it comes to telling people the gospel and getting them converted, if that makes sense. I just wanted to work with people, mentor, support people as they go through whatever they're going through in their life, helping them grow their relationship with God, helping them heal, helping them, maybe open themselves up and, become more of who they're meant to be through, this adventure with God and whatever it is, that was kind of my draw. And then I'm a singer. I grew up singing on worship teams and leading worship. And so I did that in YWAM a little bit. And that was definitely a huge pull too, of just being like, these are my things that I'm passionate about and my gifts. And, of course, I want to use these things to serve God and, impact people in a positive way. And so I think and then tied with, I really did not want to go home to Kansas City. So I was like, well, I guess I'll stay here. And people in YWAM do a really good job of seeking out young students basically to come back on staff and also sparking that or fanning that flame of, yeah, these are your gifts. Why not just do that here? And it's the best thing that you could do because it's for God and it's like you'll be a missionary, And so it really got me because I am so passionate about all of that I just said. But that's the reason I stayed and joined staff. And the reason I left was, of course, is a huge long story. Basically me realizing that the leaders and the other staff that I thought I could trust and that had become really close to me and had become somewhat a family to me, I eventually realized that I don't want to be like insane, but they're pretty hypocritical and they care more about what they look on the outside maybe, or the mission as a whole, or, so on and so forth, over an individual person and what that person went through. And so yeah, it was really it was really rough because I basically came forward to people about abuse that had happened to me, and people that I literally thought were good friends of mine and people that I could trust. And the fallout after that was insane. It was a pretty traumatizing experience to see the shift of everyone turning against me basically, and just proving to me that a lot of the talk was just talk, and the actual, when it came down to it, actually caring about the individual person and taking care of, the flock, the sheep, the one, was out the window when it came down to it. And it was like, okay, protect the institution, protect the leadership, protect our image,
Yeah.
and so
That kind of brings
I,
me back.
yeah, it's intense. Yeah, it's really rough. That's what spurred me out of there, because it was kind of like,
Hmm.
not, I wasn't necessarily kicked out, but it's a conversation of like, well,
Yeah, this
obviously
may
I don't
not
want
be
to
the
be
best
here
fit.
anymore. Yeah, like I obviously don't want to be here anymore because you don't care about me apparently at all. And then them trying to turn it into, we definitely think it's your time, kind of that kind of conversation. I'm like, well, yeah, obviously I don't want to be here anymore. You don't have to kick me out because I'm already leaving. That takes a toll on your faith. Going through that and experiencing a massive betrayal and a people rallying to protect basically an abuser and pushing me out like I was nothing. I'm like, I can talk about it right now in a more chill way, but me going through that 6 years ago was devastating, a huge betrayal. And I had to completely restart, at square one and try to figure out, what do I believe and what am I going to do? And so that sent me in a full downward spiral, I guess. And as you said earlier, the feeling of when it comes to faith in God and just even talking about that stuff, I literally could not do it for years because I was so messed up and traumatized. It's just such a vulnerable topic for me. And only in the last maybe year and a half or two have I come into a lot more healing, I guess, in some way, to where I'm like, okay, it doesn't feel as life and death or traumatizing. And I think it's because of the, what do you call it? Survival mode. I'm sure you can relate to that. If you're in survival mode, you just are just trying to survive. You're just working, you're putting your head down, and you're just trying to get through. And it doesn't leave a lot of mental and emotional space to really go into the things that you would want to maybe think about and process. And it's our mind and our body and everything actually protecting us because of, the trauma and the severe, let's say, spiritual abuse or whatever it might be, because it could be so many different things for you and so many different things for me that will impact our brains. And then we'll just shut down and be like, I can't even go there. And so that's how it was for me for a long time. I was really had just put so much of my like trust and faith and all of that stuff in with those people. And so when when I basically lost my entire community and was pushed out and betrayed, and I mean, people blocked me on stuff. People never, friends of mine never spoke to me ever again. It was just this whole thing. And yeah, I really couldn't. I went to visit a little church, the Sanctuary in Colorado Springs, and it's a very small church. And one of their main focuses is the unhoused and homeless people in the city. And just being like, anyone can come to church basically. And, it's an open door here. And they did a lot to serve the community. And I don't know if it was a few months after I left YWAM, I was like, I just want to, give it a try. And I was in such a rough place that I'm like, I'll just go to church and see, how it goes. And I don't know how long I was in there, but I genuinely started freaking out and having an anxiety attack just from going into that environment of worship happening and people praying and all that stuff. And I literally had to go outside and I just waited for my roommate to be done with the service. And so after that happened, which had never, like, I just didn't have that relationship with church. I had a really good one, especially growing up and stuff, and so experiencing that really shook me. And I was like, okay, I can't do it, I guess, anymore. I can't. And so after that, I I didn't have any answers, but I just was like, I can't. I'm obviously not ready to be in a church environment.
Yeah.
I'm traumatized. So
Yeah. Did you still have a personal faith experience that you were able to process through, or was that connected as well? And that was something that wasn't really safe at that time either?
it would kind of ebb and flow, if that makes sense. Singing and worship has always been a important thing in my life since I was a kid because of, these environments I grew up in, and that being a big aspect of me connecting with God, even just by myself with a guitar, with worship music on my phone or whatever. And I actually couldn't really listen to worship music for a long time, and I would try every once in a while. And sometimes I would just have a very peaceful experience, I guess. But I definitely felt like God had left me or something after I left YWAM, or I had left God. I don't know. I definitely was like, where are you? I definitely was struggling around in the dark. Where are you, God? And I would try to not manufacture, but just try to put myself in a position to have a experience with God, or, do something, listen to worship music, or I would play my guitar and sing, or whatever it was. And again, sometimes I would feel like an extremely just peaceful, calm feeling. But I'm like such an overthinker that I started to be like, this is just conditioned in me. So when I go to play this worship music, of course I'm going to feel this way because I love this song and I've listened to it 1,000 times, and this is what it makes me feel, if that makes sense. And that's how my brain works. Like I'm thinking about the thinking about the thinking about, and then being like, so is it all just like I've conditioned myself into, feeling this certain way when I do this? But there were a lot of times that I wasn't actively week to week, month to month being like, God, where are you? Trying to pray, because um I felt so betrayed and hurt and traumatized that even that felt too vulnerable, because I just was trying to self protect. And so there were moments where I was like, God, where the hell are you? Where are you? And then, but a lot of the time I just was like, I'm just going along with life, and I have no idea what I think about all of that happened at YWAM, and the way that it's affected my faith. But I've never been a person to be like, or I guess I wasn't like, screw you, God, you left me, that kind of stuff. I just was like, this is so rough. I don't even know where to start. And yeah.
Was that a pretty similar feeling to the state you were in before you went into YWAM, or totally different?
Yeah, honestly, that was a similar state. Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought about that, but I I would definitely say there was a theme of that feeling. Almost like I have that faith, I guess, or it's still in there, but it's just nothing is working out in my actual reality, and making me feel like God is doing anything, or speaking or whatever. And I always really struggled with that too, because of, I think, my own mental health stuff and having OCD and literally not knowing it. Again, I literally thought every person in the entire world was experiencing what I experienced with OCD. And it has blown my mind the last few years to research OCD. And once I realized I had it, I just thought this is what it was like to be a human. And so I struggled with the hearing God speak and all of that, because there's so much going on up here that it's like, what are we talking about when we say God spoke to me? Are we saying you heard an audible voice? You had a feeling? And when we actually start talking about those specifics, it can be hard for a lot of people because, again, there's not a lot of evidence or clear cut. Yeah, we know for a fact that God speaks in this way, and so I think a lot of my wrestling was looking for God and wanting to see and hear and, experience certain things. And I wanted to feel better basically and be fixed. And I think that isn't necessarily a good thing that the church or Christians teach. You go pray to get something from God, for God to give you something, let's say, or to fill whatever need, or all of that stuff, because I was like, well, when is it going to happen? And when that doesn't happen, again, it goes back to what you were saying. Like, you just start to question, what's wrong with me? Am I the one person here that God can't communicate with, or won't communicate with? You can take that so many different ways. Won't communicate with, can't. is unable to get past certain things in my mind. I think I just stopped doing the wrestling and the struggling that I spent a majority of my life doing, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Probably because I was so traumatized and, and messed up that I was exhausted and had to go into survival mode. And so that's the good thing about that, I guess, is that I didn't even have the energy anymore to be wrestling and struggling with God and faith and all of these things. It just was like, I have no idea. And I'm just trying to make it to the next day and figure out how to heal from all this messed up stuff. But
Yeah. So it seems like you're out of that now. There's been a lot of change in you where it seems like you've grown in your confidence, and that's just the impression that I get. Was there another phase that you came into a little bit later, or was there something that changed for you? I don't really know where your story went after you left.
yeah. Yeah. So trying to think back over the last 6 years. You're right in saying I'm more confident. I think I just grew up and came into actually myself without, I guess, all the noise and people telling me I needed to be a certain way or act a certain way. It was super freeing to me for me to just let go of Christianity when it comes to all the supposed stuff that you're supposed to do, like go to church, read the Bible, worship, pray about this, pray about everything, all that stuff. And once I released myself of the responsibility to serve God and do stuff for God and really have everything figured out so that I could basically serve God, once I kind of let myself off the hook of the intense responsibility of you are a Christian, you need to do all of these things. You need to not do all of these things. And you need to live your life in a very specific way. And it looks a certain way. And you have to, like, it's not like the church is explicit in the way that, like, okay, you have to look this way and dress this way, but it's within the culture. You do kind of have to operate in a specific way. And I think I became so much more free and more myself when I just was like, just do whatever you want, I guess. I just like, like, because it's all I could do because I was in pure survival and I had to start from scratch with, no money and no job and, only a few friends. And I wasn't ready to go back. I didn't think I could heal in Kansas City.
Okay, so you're still in the Springs at that point?
Yeah, so I was in the Springs working there for a while. And then I moved. I moved with my roommate. We moved to the Seattle area to her parents and worked remote in the Seattle area for a while and then moved back to Colorado to Fort Collins. And so I spent the last, I think it was 3 years in Fort Collins. And it was an interesting experience because it was almost like swinging from the extreme of YWAM and the culture of YWAM to almost the polar opposite of it. Not necessarily in my beliefs, but like just the people that I was around. And I mean, I'm sure you've gone through something similar in some way of just normal life, regular people who are all on the opposite end of the spectrum, completely anti God, I
Right
guess,
wing
or
stuff and
anti,
yeah,
yeah,
conservatism.
just like the exact opposite. And which I obviously needed to swing a little bit to just recover and heal and try to figure out what I actually believe and everything. And I think I just started to feel I went through the struggle of not feeling the purpose, I guess, that you feel when you think you're doing something for God every day and being a missionary and serving God. Just was working random jobs, just trying to have fun, try to make friends. And I for so angry and hurt, so angry at the people that hurt me. I'm sure angry at God in some way, but I just couldn't even go there. I just didn't even have the energy to be angry at God. I just was trying to survive and almost trying to so badly felt like, why did I ever go to YWAM? I wish I never went type of thing. And I hate that because my entire who I am is very like no regrets. Like we just do what we do. And then, I can't change what I chose to do in the past. That's just what I did at that time with the information I had. And that's the way that I like to operate in life is just being like very not rigid in that way of like, okay, I genuinely wish I could go back in time and change the past, instead of just saying, I'm just accepting it because who I am today is because of literally every day leading up to today. And I struggled with that mindset of, part of me is wanting to just say I wish I never went there and almost put all of that stuff in a little box and
Yeah.
restart.
Yeah.
And you literally can't do it. It's so like, you can't keep all the stuff in the box.
Yeah. I never finished, but I had a therapist suggest I do something like that. I'm like, that
Yeah.
makes no sense to me. I can't do that.
Yeah. Just put it away, tuck it away, and then it's gone. Yeah. I wanted to so bad, just trying to forget and disassociate and do basically anything I could to forget so many of those years. And yeah, now my memory's trash. I'm just kidding. I'm like, and now I
I
did
gotcha.
forget it all. No, but you know, the last 6 years have been definitely a journey, super, super up and down. And me, a lot of the time, just trying to run away from the darkness and the bad things that have happened to me, and which I was doing when I went to YWAM, but I was operating within that framework of, the more I open myself up and trust God and have these experiences with God, and I'm willing to heal and all that stuff, He will take that stuff away and heal me and fix me. And then, I can be like everyone else, or I can be who I want to be, or whatever it is. I genuinely was like, okay, I'm going to just put my heart and soul into this. And, God will take away the pain and abuse and darkness and stuff that I had already when I went to YWAM. And so when I left YWAM, I was like, great, I think I've just doubled it, doubled the, yeah, doubled the darkness, doubled the trauma. And so just trying to run from that stuff, and God healing me wasn't an option anymore, if that makes sense. Even though I would have never put that into words, it just kind of happened. I was like, well, I did that. I tried that. And guess what happened? The Christian people and the good people that I looked up to and was vulnerable to, they took advantage of that, and they abused me and they hurt me and they betrayed me and, sent me on my way. And now I'm even worse off than I left there, being like, whoa, I'm worse off than I was coming in. And I'm 24, 25 now. My life is almost over completely, because that's how now I don't think that I'm 31 and I'm like, I have my entire life. But in my early 20s, I was like, I just wasted, most of my 20s here. And all for that to be, all for my mental struggles and my wounds and all of this stuff to be compounded and then sent out to just, wander and see what happens. And so I definitely was living in a way that was just trying to disassociate and numb and figure out how to feel better and run away from my issues and struggles and trauma and all of that stuff. And the problem is, no matter what you do, you just can't get away from that stuff. It's all inside of you. So it's like, you can drink, and you can drink, you can do drugs, you can get really good at disassociating, and you can, like, whatever it is, fill in the blank. I'm like, you can basically do anything. And at the end of the day, you're still there. And those wounds and the issues, and then the faith aspect, it's all just still sitting there ready for you to address it. And the longer you push it down, I think, well, I don't know, but I think the longer you suppress something inside of yourself, the worse or the harder it might be to deal with it once it all comes up to the surface. And I've had little moments over the last few years where it's just a big, overwhelming explosion of all the pain and trauma, trying to get a word in, basically, and trying to be like, yeah, we're still here, by the way. And the only way those things go away is if you actually look at them and
Hmm.
experience them, experience the feelings that come along with them, and then do your best to, like, let those things pass and move, basically. And instead of just being like, I'm pushing you down into a box, putting the lid on and trying to distract myself, basically, until I feel better. The box is still there with all the stuff in it. And so until you open it up and take it all out and look at it and be like, yeah, this is super messed up. And this is why I'm feeling this way. And this is like, and it's okay that I'm feeling this way. It's okay that I'm extremely angry. You know what I'm saying? It's huge to just look at your internal world and instead of wrestling with it and fighting it and saying, well, you're not supposed to be angry or, only this small thing happened to you. You shouldn't be that upset about it or you shouldn't be angry about it. Instead, just accepting it and saying, yeah, I am super angry. And it makes sense that I'm angry because of the things that I've experienced. And instead of just denying all of those darker feelings or emotions, which Christianity can be super good at teaching you to do. And it's like I was operating in a similar way, I guess, but not in the Christian framework because everyone's just dealing with their pain and their trauma and their stuff. And people who are Christian, at least from my experience, are dealing with it through prayer, through meditating on scripture, through, getting together with a group and praying for each other, all of that kind of stuff. And some of that is amazing. And some of that people are just disassociating and they're only willing to feel the happy, positive emotions. And they're not actually like, they're not looking at the shame that that they're carrying around and don't know what to do with, or the anger that they're carrying around, or, so on and so forth. And so it's the same idea. It's like people do that at church and in that world in YWAM, let's say, and then people do that in just normal everyday living, trying to disassociate and numb and push all of that stuff aside. But I love your doubting Thomas thing because I think that ties in with that. In the Bible, I don't know exactly specifically what happened, but what I've learned about doubting Thomas was he was like, well, show me the scars on your hands so that I know that it's you who just got crucified, And it's actually facing, not just being like, he didn't pull away and like be like, well, I'm just going to be doubting and thinking about this by myself or pretending like, yeah, totally. He just was like, okay, you show me that it's you then. And actually facing being authentic with what he was actually thinking and feeling, which was probably there's no way that this is real.
Yeah.
And guess what? He might have been the only one of all the disciples that did that, but I'm sure all of them were thinking this is crazy and we don't know if this is real. Again, I don't know what I believe about all of that anyway, but I'm just talking about that scenario. Of course, these people are majority of them, even if they didn't say it out loud, be like, what the heck? I don't know if this is real. But Thomas was the only one that was willing to actually be real and be authentic and actually say what was going on for him, which was he didn't really believe that it was true. And he wanted to actually get some evidence and, seek more information to see what was actually going on. But
so do you feel like you've reached a point in your life where you have a better understanding of what is true as far as your experience, and how did you start coming around to that?
yeah, my experience, like specifically with God and spirituality, or
Yeah, that would probably be the general idea, but I haven't lived your life, so I don't know like what
yeah,
is the overarching theme of where do you find meaning and
yeah, it's tough because you can't always like hindsight is 2020, but also looking back at your life, you can't always have a perfect puzzle of like, okay, now everything fits and makes sense. That isn't always going to be the case. Sometimes with some situations it will be, but for me, I'm still sorting through I guess, my beliefs and my faith in God. I always had a genuine faith and I don't have any doubt about that. So I don't look back thinking, was I not being real? Like I'm not perfect, but I like the way that I am is very authentic and genuine. Again, I'm not perfect all the time. Of course, I've been fake before, I've performed before, everyone has. But that's part of my personality is just being like, this is just me. I'm just going to like kind of go with it. And so I'm thankful to be able to look back and say that I was really genuine in what I was doing and super genuine in using my gifts and my talents and my passion I mean, at the time serve God, but just love people and serve people and try to make this world a better place and try to impact people in a positive way. And I now I'm still the same as that. I just have completely rejected organized religion and the idea of, sorry, there's flies in here, I guess.
it's okay.
But a little fly or something. I just can't do the religious aspect where it's very control based. It's very
Mhm.
performance based. It's very, this is right and this is wrong. No room for nuance, no room for the gray. And just being like, we actually don't know we don't actually know, not to be existential but I just am that kind of person. We don't even know what is real in the first place. And that scares some people. But what gives me and my life meaning and purpose to me is that I am existing right now and I have all of this love to give and all these gifts and passions. Every person does. And I get to decide today whether to be a someone who has a positive impact on the people around me day to day, or I can just say it doesn't matter at all and, be a miserable, angry, whatever it is. I've been through so much to where I almost got worn down in a good way to just be like, it's not, everything is so deep and complex. And at the same time, it's not that deep. And religions have overcomplicated everything to the point of wanting to control people, basically. And that's, in my opinion, that's kind of the point, especially in the Western church. It's just used for control, mass control of people, what they think, what they believe, and then how they act. And we have a spirituality that I can't always put into words because I feel like I have a genuine connection to God. I say, have you ever heard of the term GUS? GUS?
If I did, I forgot what it meant.
Okay. It's God, universe, source.
Okay, actually, yes.
And like kind of thinking those are like, that's kind of
Mhm.
my idea of I'm like God, universe, source in a way of like, we came from somewhere and we're very complex individuals. We aren't the same. I think we aren't the same as other animals. We're similar, but not the same in a lot of ways to other animals. And so I do believe there's some sort of source in that way and like something that we came from. And in my mind, I'm like, my beliefs, like, they just don't really tie to the Bible that much. But I am like, I'm still trying to figure it out, but my spirituality is very open handed and open. I don't know, if that makes sense. And
Yeah, it's kind of similar to where I am, I'd say, where I've seen enough and experienced enough that there's got to be something. I just don't think it's what you told me it was.
yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah. And I don't have all the answers, but I definitely don't think it's all of that. I think a lot of it is unnecessary and it can be simplified way further down to just, why do we need a person or a God to tell us like to love each other and treat each other well for that to be important? Because like if you just think about yourself and your feelings and what you go through mentally and emotionally, the thing that is super important and impactful for you is your interactions with the world around you, especially the humans around you and the way that they are impacting you and treating you. And so we can kind of just follow the trail so then it would be super important, obviously, how we treat other people and how we talk to each other. And, it can go all the way up to murder. Yeah, it's not good to murder someone. If someone murdered you or murdered your friend or your family member, you would have an immediate visceral reaction that is not good and not right. And unless you have completely become sociopathic or, developed some sort of barrier to having any empathy, if you went and killed someone, majority of people on this earth would have an immediate visceral reaction and know that wasn't a good thing, even if there wasn't a punishment for it, even if you were the only two people in the entire world and you're out in the woods and no one would ever know. That's still going to impact you and your psyche and your emotions that you killed someone. And like, to me, that's proof that things matter, that, people matter, life matters. The way that we live our life matters. What we do to other people matters. And it doesn't have to be a huge grand thing that was commanded to us from God to be able to try to work that out with each other, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
kind of intuitive.
Supposedly.
Yeah. So One thing I wanted to try to ask to kind of wrap up that story in a sense is considering the perspective that you have now, is there anything that you would tell your younger self in one of those seasons that you think would have made a big difference to you?
Oh, that's a great question.
If there was someone who might relate to a certain portion of what you were talking about, what piece of advice might you give to them that might help them get through that?
Yeah. And if you I think the main thing is we get obsessed with the wrestling and the struggle and the knowing and the understanding and having a really firm grip on like what everything means and what we believe and all of that stuff. I think for me, one of the biggest things has just been letting go of that control, letting go of the actual act of wrestling and struggling and trying to work out, they call it working out your salvation or working out your faith. You can get stuck on this wheel and you end up just not going anywhere because you have this framework and you have a tight grip on what you supposedly want the answer to be or what you want to happen. Let's say it's healing. Let's say it's you getting over something bad that happened to you. Let's say it's finances. It's like this prosperity gospel thing of you're wanting something from God and you're trying to do all of this stuff or figure out all this stuff or act a certain way or do this or do that so that that stuff falls into place and happens for you. And if you are willing to just let go and open your hands of even thinking that you have control over anything that God is doing. You know, let's just say I'm just here and like God is over there and it's just that's it. It might seem bleak to some people, but that can be a super freeing thing if you're thinking God is always there being like, do this and do this and do this. Or if God's there holding back all the blessings and the things that you want so bad. If you just remove all of that stuff and say, I am going to just accept myself as I am right now, even with the anger and the pain, I have to be able to accept that because the only way that you're going to move past that time in your life is to fully accept and embrace that. And so we get stuck in these cycles of trying to get different outcomes and trying to control what is going on in our life. We're trying to move out of a specific, I don't know how to describe it, season of your life or time in your life. We want so bad to just get to the good thing that we're wanting, the healing, whatever it is. And instead of just being where we are right now. And even when it comes to our faith and even when it comes to our answers about God, like what if there's not a good answer for the question that you're asking? You know,
Yeah, that's a
what
hard one.
we're looking for, at least for me, I'm like, I'm looking for simple answers and clear answers for questions that are super complex. And I'm expecting God to what? Speak in an audible voice or perform a miracle. You know, it's just, and I'm not saying not to be hopeful because I think there's hope in letting go and saying, I'm going to be open to what comes next and know that I am going to be okay because I'm actually going to accept what I'm feeling and going through and what's going on inside of me. And when it comes down to it, whether there's God or not, we have the people in our life, but when it comes down to it, we have ourselves. And if you can fully prove to yourself and prove to yourself that you are going to be okay no matter what outcome is coming, if that makes sense. And just be open to the openness can bring hope and goodness too. And the openness can bring, you know, any bad thing that happens. But guess what? We don't have control over either of those things. So either we're clenching our fists and holding on tightly to specific beliefs or specific dogmas or specific ways that we're supposed to be, all of these different things, specific whatever it is, verses that we were taught. If you don't have an answer about like a belief, it's okay to just say, I don't know, and let it go instead of spending so much energy and time and emotion trying to work things out that people have been trying to work out for thousands of years. And we haven't been able to figure out the answers. I don't know if that makes sense, but the letting go of control actually brings so much freedom than people think.
I like it.
Yeah. Thank
Absolutely. I really appreciate your perspective, and it was refreshing, and I enjoyed hearing a lot of things that I haven't really thought about. Do you have any book recommendations?
That's a great question. Man, I'm constantly reading a ton of books. Let me think. Well, I found one of my favorite books in the entire world last year, and it's called Waking the Tiger. And it's a book about healing trauma.
Okay.
And it is by his name's Peter Levine. And man, I read this book after literally spending most of my entire life being obsessed with psychology and mental health and healing and self-help, all of that. I've read so many
Hmm.
books. I read this book and it was like finally reading something that felt like almost a kindred spirit type language, something that I was like, okay, I can actually connect with this. A lot of the other trauma books, I was just like, okay, I have no idea what's going on. But this is Waking the Tiger is talking about us being, when it comes to our instincts, that we are just animals in the best way possible, and that we are actually built in a way that can deal with trauma and work through things intuitively and instinctively. And we see that happen in nature. We see animals go through insane traumatic scenarios, and they're out there almost getting eaten or killed every day, and trying to find food, and they do very specific things in the wild to basically shake off traumatic experiences and move past them. And humans, because of all of the parts of our brains that are way more developed than all the animals in the animal kingdom, because of our overdeveloped brain, we have gotten stuck intellectualizing and just thinking about things that we go through instead of instinctually in our physical body and our physiology doing the things that is natural and instinctual to go through grief and trauma and all of that stuff. It's an awesome book. I now recommend it to everyone.
Awesome.
You can learn stuff, but when it comes down to it, you actually have everything within your grasp, in your mind and in your body to go through the things you need to go through and work through and heal and move past instead of looking everywhere outside of yourself, including, let's say, God, might I add. We have everything inside of us built in already. And I could say it's from God and it's from source or whatever, but it's already there. It's not something that we need to try to find outside of ourselves. We don't need to be fixed. We need to sort things out within ourselves and follow our intuition and gut and all of that stuff. But that's the book. What about you? Do you have one for me?
Man, I've been reading so many things that it's kind of hard to narrow it down to what I think would be a good fit for somebody. I don't know. A lot of it's been kind of dark and kind of heavy.
Okay. I
Some
read
of it
all
has
kinds of
to.
books.
Okay. Man, what was that one called? For some reason, the book that came to mind just now, it had to do with suffering. It was a psychological book that you've probably already heard of. So it's called Man's Search for Meaning.
Okay.
It's a little bit
I've
older.
definitely heard of it.
And if you're into psychology, it might be a good fit. It does talk about the Holocaust, so it's a very heavy book, but there are some really interesting perspectives on there about surviving something absolutely traumatic and developing a sense of purpose from it.
Nice.
So
Yeah, I've definitely heard of Viktor Frankl. I don't think I've read anything by him. Let's see. Yeah, I'll
it's
definitely check
relatively
it out.
short, definitely one to eat in bites.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. That's like the other trauma book I'm reading. I'm like, I can only do one chapter at a time. It's so way more like research heavy and all that
yeah.
stuff. But
Okay.
well, I would love to hear any thoughts you had on anything I said or
You definitely had a very different way of going about things because I'm a highly logical kind of person, and I know that you mentioned having so many things running through your head all of the time, but also having a little bit of a more spiritual leaning in some of the ways that you process things. So for me, that was pretty interesting to consider, something that I have a really hard time relating to, and so I was just really trying to keep up.
yeah. Yeah. I definitely think we're very different people, but I love that. There's nothing wrong with that. And I like that we can connect on similarities and can connect on our experiences. And yeah, I feel like we're even though we're super different, I'm sure we're in similar spaces and have been in similar places, as the last few years. But yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Well, once again, thank you so much. I definitely really appreciated your time and your perspective, and I really appreciate you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to talk to you.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you're attempting to grow an audience. If you are, did you want to plug that or?
I'm always down to get more friends on social media following me. My TikTok is live_strong with two G's at the end. It's LIVE_strong with another G at the end. But yeah, would love a follow. Would love to connect with anyone who has gone through anything similar to me, wants to share their story, wants someone to talk to. I'm here. I'm an open book, and I'm an open message inbox for anyone who might want to talk about these things. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much.